Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again locked in for another episode of the Conspiracy Farm. Jeffrey Wilson, as always, riding shotgun. UFC Hall of Famer, Eater of Worlds, my good friend, Pat Miletich. How you doing this morning, champ?
I'm doing good. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm really stoked. I mean, been following this guy's work for literally years. I'm just absolutely stoked that he's taken the time. He is out and about promoting his new film, or documentary, where he is the focus, authorized documentary where, like, again, he is the focus. He is author, he is researcher, he is scholar, he is Renegade. David Icke, how are you doing this morning, David, or this afternoon?
I'm good, mate. Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Thank you so very much. Again, like, your breadth of knowledge and your work covers so very much. But I've heard you in your videos, you know, promoting the movie and everything. Let's kind of start with the here and now. But before we even get into it, how are you doing? How is life treating you? I know you've been busy promoting the film. How's it going with you?
Very good. I mean, the film has been received magnificently by people because it connects dots in 1 hour, 40 minutes for people, that, especially people who are kind of new to this. One of the great things, the reason for making the film, really, one of the great pieces of feedback are people that have been into my work but have taken people along to see it in the premieres. Who knew next to nothing, and how it had an effect on them. Because you know, as you will know, when you connect the dots across a great swathe of subjects, then the world looks very different. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, there's a picture rather than a series of apparently random events,
yes.
And it has a big effect on people.
Well, as well as it should. I mean, it's very. It's going to be awesome having this conversation because our last couple episodes have dealt with kind of the larger topic that we're going to talk about, and like you just said, we're going to connect the dots. Because for me, I mean, we've talked about, you know, the West and her allies funding terror, vaccines. I mean, you kind of name it, we've talked about it. But for me, man, I really believe this is not a Moab. This is not a mother of all truth bomb or mother of all bombs. This is a Moac. This is the mother of all conspiracies. And talk to me if you don't mind, because like you said, it all ties together. And I know we don't have you very long, so we're going to try to encapsulate a lot of information in a short period of time. Climate change, sir. The nomenclature obviously has changed from man-made global warming, etc. But under the auspices of this thing we know as climate change, we're talking about eugenics. We're talking about a new level of technology, of economy, of just changing the whole way we live life. And under this is 5G. It's the Internet of all things. If you don't mind, sir, talk to me about that and how it all ties together.
If you want to control and direct a human society of 7.7, 7.8 billion people, you can't do this physically. They want to try to do that ultimately through AI connections to the human brain and the human mind, which they're obviously already talking about. But until they reach that point, you can't direct that number of people physically because there's just not enough of you. Even though you manipulate chunks of that target population to be your police state, you've still not got enough people. So you have to control and direct by hijacking perception. And perception comes from information received, and that's why we have this absolute explosion of censorship, because while we have freedom of speech and freedom of opinion, then you can't have that point where people only hear and see what you want them to see and hear. So that's why we've got all this censorship. And information takes many expressions. And like I say, perception comes from information received. It could be, what you learned at school or thought you did, but what you see in the media, whatever. And one of these sources of information to manipulate perception, thus get people to accept changes in society that come from that accepted perception, is what we call human-caused climate change. And people were asking me years ago, and it's an understandable question, when I was saying actually it's a hoax. It's not really being caused by humanity. Climate change has always been with us, and it's been in far greater extremes than anything that people perceive to be happening now.
Right.
Long before we had a situation where
echo again, Pat. I'm sorry, or echo again. Sorry, David.
Yeah. Okay. Long before any technology existed that was producing CO2, carbon dioxide. So when you have the medieval warm period, when temperatures were much higher than they are now, what was causing that? Obviously, it wasn't carbon dioxide, because humans weren't producing it except breathing out. I suppose we can always ban breathing. Wait for that one. And so the question that I was asked is, but why would they lie to us about this? And what I said at the time was because they want to use it as an excuse to transform human society. They want to have an excuse to impose their will upon the fine detail of everyone's life. They want to centralize power and use "we need to save the world" as the reason for justifying it. And what is happening now, as this climate change is ramped up, and note it became known as climate change after temperatures stopped rising, right, when they called it global warming. What we're seeing now is precisely what I said was the agenda, not because I am a genius, but because if you can uncover what is planned, you can predict the future unless something intervenes to stop that happening. And now we've got the Green New Deal of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is basically wanting to change society in the way that I said the whole hoax was about. We have an organization with massive connections to the elite and billionaires in Britain called Extinction Rebellion that's been shutting streets in London in protest at not enough being done for climate change. And what they're demanding is basically Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. We have the United Nations that's been pushing an agenda to transform human society, centralize control of everything, called Agenda 21 and the update Agenda 2030, which is demanding what I said that this whole thing was about. And then when you actually look at the, it's a very good litmus test to what is the agenda when you ask the question, what am I not allowed to have a different opinion about? What do I say that is censored? What do I say that is dismissed? What do the media not talk about, but only emphasize one side of the story? And when you see across the swathe of subjects what's happening today, you can pick them out one after the other. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to have this opinion. You're not allowed to say this. The media won't cover that except as a form of abuse. And it's a real simple situation. If you cannot win the debate, whatever it is, we're talking climate change now, then you don't have the debate. You're not going to have a debate you can't win. And when the full breadth of the information about climate change and the claims comes out, as with vaccines, etc., you can't win the debate. So this is when you get the debate shut down through censorship. And you look at people who are not heard, not very much anyway, very rarely in the mainstream media, climatologists and meteorologists who are putting a different view of this. And they are extremely compelling in what they describe, in the sense that there's a book I've been reading recently called Climate Chronicles by a meteorologist in America called Joe Bastardi. And he's one of these weather nerds. He's just really obsessed with weather and statistics and all these things. And he went back and looked at these different cycles. And he looked at things that happen today, and immediately, again, it's the psychological perception manipulation. You have any kind of weather a system that's just beyond the norm or just beyond the regular. It's climate change. We're all gonna die. And he thought, well, hold on a minute. Let me have a look at this. And he went back to these same climate sequences in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 20s, the 30s. And he found the same sequences, and he found them coming from the same things that are causing them today. One of his areas that he talks about was the times when the Atlantic warms and the Atlantic cools, and when the Pacific warms and the Pacific cools. And he goes through these sequences and says, when this ocean cools, this sequence happens. When this ocean cools, this sequence happens. And it's the same sequences that they're saying today, it's climate change, we're all going to die.
Is that the El Nino and La Nina?
Yeah, all these things. I mean, you know, these are natural cycles. And have you noticed something? When they're talking about human-caused climate change, they almost never mention the sun.
Right.
Now, I've noticed, I don't know whether you have, I've noticed from time to time, not very often, that when the sun comes out, it gets warmer. You know, I do feel there's some kind of
correlation there
between sun activity and climate temperature. And of course, when you look at this period they call the medieval warm period, when temperatures, 800,000 years ago were higher than they are now. What was that? Turbocharged handcarts?
Right.
And then what happened is we went into what they call the Little Ice Age, when temperatures fell dramatically. And you still see portrayals of this on Christmas cards in Britain, when you see people skating on the River Thames in London, because it used to freeze over every year. And at the bottom nadir of this Little Ice Age, when it was at its coldest, we had something called the Maunder Minimum, which was named after a guy called Maunder, and his wife was involved as well, who were charting sunspot activity when the sun is either very active and there's lots of sunspots projections from the sun, and when the sun is very inactive and there are next to none, if none. And at the bottom of that coldest Little Ice Age point was the Maunder Minimum, when there was no sunspot activity. It was a real down period for projections of energy from the sun. And then we climbed out of the Little Ice Age to present day. And when they say, this is the hottest day since records began, what they don't tell you is most of these records began as we were still coming out of the Little Ice Age. So the comparisons between those and now are basically irrelevant. Just finally, what I am seeing more and more, but you have to go looking for it, of course, you won't get this on the BBC or MSNBC, is the number of scientists now who are changing their mind and saying, actually, I'm not sure that this is happening. But there's a great line that was said. It's basically the theme of it was, it's very difficult to get someone to accept something if their salary, their career is dependent on them accepting it. And of course, there's an enormous, fantastic amounts of money flowing around for scientists who are willing to repeat from and sing from the song sheet of climate change. Right. And there's a lot of consequences of the other kind for scientists who choose to say, I'm not buying it.
And like you said, the control of the information and the narrative, we talk about it all the time on this show, like with Operation Mockingbird and the media, it thus controls your perception of what's going on. And like we've said, that they're playing off people's just genuine humanity, their basic good in humans. And of course we want to take care of the planet. Of course we want to take care of our environment. But that's within that is really the misdirection, because ultimately the eugenicists, they hate human beings and they're demonizing human beings. And this, by controlling the information and getting everyone to acquiesce to this, like I said in the beginning, this is ushering in, and like you just mentioned with Agenda 21, the Internet of Things, and even moving into, I guess I'll ask, are you seeing more of a frequency of asteroids that are going to hit us, or UFO sightings. We've had like official military confirmation of this now.
Yeah.
Do you find this accidental, and do you feel is possible real disclosure coming, or is it what people have lamented a lot that they're going to do, basically a fake alien invasion to, at the end of the day, augment all of this apparatus and weaponized space and 5G, et cetera, et cetera? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things I've said over the years is nothing's more manipulatable than genuineness that isn't streetwise, and it's the streetwise bit that putting out this information is trying to achieve. And the question, who benefits? Who benefits from me believing this? And if you, another thing that I've said over the years is know the outcome and you'll see the journey. If you know where it's meant to go, then apparently random events that they would seem to be otherwise, if you didn't know where it was going, become very clear stepping stones to that outcome.
Right.
And of course, one of the things that I wrote about in the 1990s was this phrase, problem, reaction, solution, where you create a problem, you get the public to react to the problem, do something, and then you offer a solution to the problem you've created. And there's another version, which I call no problem, reaction, solution, where you don't need a real problem, you just need the perception of one. And of course, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was a classic. So if you bring all this together on the fact that this control of humanity is actually perceptual control, which from that comes behavior control, then you need to look at things in a slightly different way. And the whole UFO thing is one of them. Funnily enough, you bring this subject up. I did a video on my website recently, last few days, talking about this very subject. I've been following this for a very long time, and anyone that looks into my work in any detail will see that I am saying that behind the human manipulation is actually a non-human force. So when the Navy and the Pentagon start coming out now with more openness, oh yeah, we're seeing UFOs all the time, then I should be saying, see, told you I was right.
Right.
But I'm not reacting like that. I'm saying, hold on a minute. I know from my own research, I spent a lot of time in America on these subjects in the 1990s, that they have worked so hard to suppress genuine information about UFO activity. They have put tremendous surveillance and pressure on people who've come from the inside and want to talk about what they know. And now suddenly you're seeing it openly talked about, and the question is why? You know, unless they've visited the Syrian capital and had a massive change of heart on the road to Damascus, there's a scam going on here. And so we come back to problem, reaction, solution, or no problem, reaction, solution. You might remember that in 1987, and I'm not saying he said it for this reason, but he certainly articulated the theme accurately. Ronald Reagan made a speech at the UN in which he was saying, look, if we had a threat from basically an alien race, we'd all come together, wouldn't we? And so when you look at know the outcome and you'll see the journey, the outcome that they want, only on one level, is a completely centralized global tyranny based on a world government that in the end would not even be elected, it would be appointed, and a world army imposing the will of the world government on any people or communities that didn't want to accept the imposition. Now, of course, if we did have a threat from outside, and people believe that there was a threat, and they do have the technology to pull it off, that's without doubt.
Bluebeam, Project Bluebeam. Project
Bluebeam, yes, going back to the 1990s.
Voila, global army, right?
Yeah, that what would they say? We've got to come together. We've got to pool our military resources. What happens when a country goes to war? Certainly countries like Britain, they have a war cabinet where democracy is suspended, and a few people who are appointed to the war cabinet then decide what happens across the swathe society. We must stop this for the war effort. We must stop this and do this for the war effort. And that's what you would have globally if this was the case. Now, ironically, this is where I'm coming from. The aliens are not coming; they're already here and operating behind this network of bloodlines and secret societies that are directing human society. So any idea that we're going to be invaded is just a hoax, and red flags should be flying and red flashing lights should be going off everywhere if they ever come out and start to evolve this openness, this disclosure into there's a threat from outside and we must come together to meet the threat, because that will be the hoax.
And Trump has actually made that kind of lean toward that a little bit by making the statement that, you know, this country needs something major to happen for it to come together, along with flashes of light on the moon and UFO sightings and all the other stuff. It really leads me to think that they might be, you know, leading up to this.
Well,
the space agency.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look at NASA, NASA was created by German Nazis brought from Germany at the end of the war.
Werner von Braun.
Von Braun, Werner von Braun. Now, that's an interesting story because I was writing in my books years ago. It's that came out quite a little time ago now, of a lady who worked for von Braun. She was basically an assistant. You probably come across
Carol Rosen or something like that.
That's the one, yeah. Who said that he told her that a series of things would happen, and if they happened, basically they were hoaxes.
Right.
And it's interesting. One of them you brought up earlier, which was threat from asteroids. Another one was an alien invasion. Another one was countries of concern. These are all
aliens. It was like terror, aliens, nation
states.
Yeah,
all that stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. The lot. And this was kind of ages ago that he said this to her. And basically, we're ticking them off one by one. So there is, I mean, I know this after 30 years of research. There is an agenda. They're not making this up. Obviously, they have to tweak it here and there as they observe and monitor human reaction to what they're doing. But basically, there is an agenda. This is how Aldous Huxley could write Brave New World. This is how Eric Blair, better known as George Orwell, could write 1984 in the 1940s. This is why people I quoted from 1969, etc., insiders, could describe the world as it is today and what's happening today in some detail. How they could describe the internet before anyone in the public arena has ever known anything about an internet. There is an agenda. There's two worlds. There's one occupied by this network of manipulation, and that has a certain level of knowledge. And then there is the public arena, which that is manipulating, which is kept in a much more limited level of knowledge. So what happens is when you start to uncover the knowledge base and the agenda of this other world, if you like, that's operating in the shadows, then that world of everyone else that's coming from a much more limited level of information, they are understandably in large numbers going to laugh and ridicule and dismiss what you're saying the plan is, because so much of what is happening can only happen because the level of knowledge in this other world is in the shadows is much greater than it is in the public arena. So to the public arena, again, another excuse in part justified by protecting the planet from climate change is 5G and this big technological Wi-Fi society. Now, if you only have a certain level of information and you don't go anywhere else, you will say 5G, that's great. That is going to download me movie in seconds. But if you have access to what this other shadow world knows, you go, this is potentially absolutely catastrophic on multiple levels for not only humanity physically, but humanity psychologically. So this is the if you like, the tussle all the time to keep the knowledge of this hidden world and what it knows and what it plans from the public, which again brings us back to this fantastic explosion of censorship, because the internet was created, and the foundation of it was created by DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, which has no interest in the benefits of anything for humanity, quite the opposite. No. And it had all along an agenda for the internet. It wanted it to become the central pillar of human society in a way that was irreversible. To get to that point, they had to allow the internet to become something that people wanted. And so we had a period of no censorship. And in that period, information was circulating that was getting people to go, hold on a minute, this is making more sense than what I saw before. Mm-hmm. And so now they've reached that point where the internet is the central pillar of human society, and it's irreversible. So then we'll now make the internet what we planned all along and shut down everything that we don't want people to hear. They played the same scam with Amazon, with Facebook, with Google. Build up these internet giants until they're near monopolies. And in the build up, so you get massive support for them, you allow the free flow of information. Once you reach that point, and we're there, where they're near monopolies, well, so what are you going to do about it? You're going to start another platform, we'll destroy it. Then we see the censorship coming in the same way that we do with the internet as a whole. And this whole 5G and this whole Wi-Fi smart technology all connects into the internet, because what they're building in front of our eyes is a smart grid, which is ultimately designed to be connected to the human brain. And from that point, we won't have or the humans won't have their perceptions manipulated by controlling information. They'll get their perceptions direct from AI.
Wow. And part of that process, as you said, is, we have to become completely reliant on this machine. They have to, completely rely on it. And the eugenicists, they look at us as, they say, fodder. And as you said in a lot of your videos, they almost have to tell you, what they're going to do before they do it. And we see that play out quite a bit. What do you, I mean? And again, this thing can't work without us. And so kind of through our silence, we are acquiescent to it. But talk to us about how they, especially with the whole, there's no more individuals anymore, it's all groups. And even just from a larger kind of metaphysical standpoint, they keep us so resonated on such low frequencies that we're so easy to manipulate. Talk to us, if you will, about our participation in this and how they, manipulate us to keep us so basic.
Well, if you go back to the basic nature of the I, the infinite I, it's not the labels that we give ourselves, it's the consciousness that is experiencing those labels. So whether you are black, white, whatever, whether you're this religion or that religion, just whatever income bracket you are, those labels are just experiences. What we are is the awareness, the consciousness that's having those experiences. And if you are a manipulative force that is manipulating and controlling via perception, then you need perception as focused and limited as possible. You basically need it to only perceive the 5 sense level of everything. Can I touch it, taste it, see it, hear it? Okay, it exists then. And anything beyond that, you ridicule, you dismiss, you call it pseudoscience, you call it paranormal when it's perfectly normal. And perceptions, like every thought and every emotion, are frequencies. If you are in a state of depression, then you are resonating in a very dense, low frequency, which relates to the vibration of depression. Same with anxiety, massively the same with fear. This is why people say when they're in those states, I feel heavy, I feel so heavy today. It's because their energetic field has become so dense because of the slow vibration. And that then interacts with reality within that band of frequency. And those people will see themselves in terms only of their five sense labels, I am R, as I call it, and they will only perceive five sense reality. And of course, the whole basis of the conspiracy is to isolate the population in five sense reality and then control the information at that level that they receive, thus controlling their perception. What happens, not just now, but all the way through history, which is why the authorities have always been targeting and terrified of mavericks and renegades and people that won't absorb the program, that want to let their mind wander into more expanded realms. What happens is, as you say, re-self-identify from I am my label, I'm Bill and I'm a bus driver, that's what I am, to, well, yes, Bill and driving the bus is my experience, but I am the consciousness having that experience. Then your state of awareness starts to expand because your self-identity has expanded, so does your realm of consciousness that you're accessing and being influenced by.
That's
and
deep.
when you do that,
That's
when
deep.
you expand beyond that five sense realm, you start to see things you weren't seeing before. Suddenly, from everything being random, you start to see patterns and how it's all connected. So the bottom line is they have to hold us in this low vibrational state, in states of fear, of anxiety, of depression, of worry, fearing the future. Because then we're in their stadium. And they don't want joy. They don't want happiness. They don't want an understanding of the nature of the true I, because all those things are much more high frequency, more expanded states of being. They don't want that. And so they've set up society to make it basically a struggle to reward those that play the game and to target those who refuse to play the game. And if you look at the basic human condition, overwhelmingly, it's about survival. Survival. Am I going to pay the rent at the end of the month? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? What's going to happen to the kids? It's all about survival. They are low vibrational states, which is what they want us in. And just finishing the point, this 5G and this technologically generated frequency C that we now live in, I mean, you know, the technological radiation in our lower atmosphere where we live, compared with the turn of the 20th century, is absolutely fantastic. Like it's millions of times greater. And this technologically generated frequency, C, with the ante being massively upped by 5G, is now holding us and affecting our vibrational state externally by what it's firing at us.
It's just heavy. Well, and it's so fascinating too when you talk about, you know, how we're just trained. You had said in one of your videos, and I'd heard it about, I think the Jesuits say something like, "Give me your kid at 6 or 7, and I have them for the rest of their life," or something like that. We put our kids in these institutions so young, you know, 4 or 5 years old. And they're just trained. There's conditioned what is, what isn't, what's possible, what's not possible. And I find that so fascinating because I find it refreshing. In another one of your videos, you said something about Morpheus and the Matrix holding up the battery, and that's what I have on my Facebook on my cover page because we're just fuel for the machine. It seems like
we are fuel for the machine. Actually, we're actually fuel for this non-human force in the end, which feeds off human energy. So the whole symbolism in the Matrix movies of the machines, think AI, feeding off human energetic fields like those babies in the farms, the baby farms in the Matrix. That's highly symbolic of what's actually been going on. Now, this is getting deep now. This force is a low vibrational phenomenon. It's a very distorted phenomenon, and thus, because we know that, because it wouldn't be doing what it's doing if it wasn't. And therefore, for it to feed off human energy, that human energy has to be generated in a frequency band that it can absorb. Otherwise, it's radio A bypassing radio B. They're not on the same wavelength. So they have to get us on this energy level to generate this low vibrational emotional energy within the frequency band that they can absorb. And that's what they've set up. It literally is that battery being held up. Now, if you start to look at it from another point of view, and people might listen to me here for the first time and say, "Oh God, this is depressing." Oh yeah, but actually, it's not. It's totally freeing and empowering, because if I looked at the world and I perceived it as a solid physical realm as we experience it, but it's not. I mean, quantum physics has shown this for a start. Then I would look at it and what's happening now, and I would say, I'm out of here, mate. Basically, I'm just going to live out the rest of my life, and I'm going to have as good a time as I can, because it's pointless what I'm doing. It's pointless what you're doing. It's pointless. We're never going to change it. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying the opposite. Because if you think that, when we have a problem, people can say we must find a solution, but solutions usually lead to other problems. The greatest way to deal with a problem is to remove the cause of it. And the cause of human control and all this stuff that's happening is that humanity has allowed its perceptions to be hijacked.
Yes.
It's allowed its perceptions to be hijacked, and it's allowed its perceptions to be limited to a range of possibility. This is really important. One of the greatest ways to control perception is to limit its perception of possibility, because then all the things that you're doing outside that perception of possibility to manipulate, people will just laugh at when anyone says this is what they're doing. So it's about taking our perceptions back. It's about redefining our self-identity from I'm little me, Bill driving the bus. That's all I am. I've got no power. I'm not powerful like those people up there. To say, like, I am consciousness, having the experience. And that consciousness that I'm accessing, that I'm being influenced by, that I'm being empowered by, can be the size of a pea symbolically, or it can be enormous. And it's not that, you have to seek to expand your awareness. Our natural state is expanded awareness. Humanity's been manipulated into an unnatural state. Why? Because of the programs. The program perceptions act like a bubble around us, and they stop us perceiving and understanding from levels of awareness that are beyond the bubble. Because the hand goes up, oh, that's crazy, I can't do that. And then there's the other thing. Well, if I do start thinking about this and talking like this, well, what will my mother say? What will the people at work say? What consequences are there for me? So this is a self-perpetuating perceptual manipulation machine, which we can break out of whenever we choose, by taking our perceptions back and by saying, I'm going to be me. I'm not going to be judge myself or allow myself to be judged as a group, as a thing, as just a name and a list of labels. I am going to express my uniqueness. And when you do that, your frequency starts to change and your perception of the world starts to change.
Let me ask you, David, because me and Pat, we talk about it all the time, and it's really kind of out there, QAnon, etc. As far as a perceptual game, a lot of people feel Donald J. Trump is a reshaping of the political paradigm, this outsider, this white hat that is, taking it to the old deep state, et cetera, et cetera. Donald Trump, is he that? Is he just another iteration of the deep state telling us kind of what we want to hear, cult of personality, kind of like Obama was, but just swung the other direction?
Basically, yes. But I'll tell you how I look at people, whether they're politicians or whatever. I listen to what they say. I don't listen to the totality of what they say and then make a decision what I think. I listen to each individual statement. And so when someone like Trump is speaking, I might say, yeah, I agree with that. And then the next sentence, absolutely don't agree with that. But what they've done with politics in general, and again, it's part of this perceptual manipulation, is they've manipulated people to judge everything by whether it's black or whether it's white. And the current situation in America is a classic example where you either hate Trump or you love Trump. You think he's a messiah or you think he's the devil. The penny drop when people start to get it is when they realize that whether it's Donald Trump or Barack Obama or George Bush or Bill Clinton, these are here today, gone tomorrow people. Another, 4 or 5 years, even if he wins a second term, Trump will be gone, just like Obama's gone and Bush is gone. But so why does the world keep going in the same direction, irrespective of these people that come and, spout their rhetoric and appear to be saying slightly different things to the one before? Because these here today, gone tomorrow politicians are a diversion. The real power is what I call the permanent government. Again, I've been writing about this for nearly 30 years, and now the deep state is almost common parlance now.
Right.
But the deep state, which is basically the intelligence, law enforcement level of the permanent government, is only part of it. The permanent government consists at the top, or at least at the top where I'll start, it goes above that, of a secret society network with a central control system. Then it comes down through control of money, control of corporations, control of government agencies, and control of the media, and so on. Then eventually you come down to the bottom where you have the here today, gone tomorrow politicians. And the permanent government is always there. It doesn't go away. It's not subject to the ballot box. The people at the bottom, the here today, gone tomorrow people, are subject to that. The trick has been to focus people's attention on the here today, gone tomorrow level of politics as where the power is and where the decisions are made that change society. That's not how it works. So if you look at Trump, the things that this permanent government want, that Trump also says he wants, they happen. And things that Trump says he wants, but the permanent government doesn't want, they don't happen. For instance, a classic example, in his election campaign, whether he meant it or not, it's what he said, he wanted to stop having America and the American military intervening and manipulating in other people's societies after the stream of Libya and Iraq and etc.
Right.
And then he appoints a series of secretaries of state and national security advisors, but they weren't really the ones that the permanent government wanted. They had one name on that national security advisor list, and one name only, called John Bolton. Mm-hmm. And John Bolton was involved with the project of the New American Century and the so-called neocons that were part of the whole Bush administration, which led to the invasion of Iraq, etc. And so eventually they got what they wanted, and Bolton came in. And suddenly the same basic agenda that was followed by the Bush administration is now being followed by them. They brought Pompeo in who is another one who has the same basic mentality as Bolton as Secretary of State. So you can see how Trump is being manipulated. They take what he wants that they want, and they block what he wants that they don't want. This happens with every president, no matter who they are. And some of the presidents, like Boy George Bush, are so controlled and so limited in their, if you like, mental capacity to see what is happening. And they've been brought up in the Bush family, in his case, so they've been schooled in this conspiracy from the start. That they just roll over, and the permanent government does what it likes. But if he hadn't, they would have pushed back on him as well. It's just the way it works.
Right. Patrick?
Yeah. I mean, all of this, when we put it all together, has to be stopped, really, to save humanity's at least soul, right? Otherwise, we're just meat suits walking around being controlled by big government. And in my mind, I'm sitting there envisioning what would it take to stop it all. I mean, you'd have to assemble intelligence officials, military people, financial folks from the financial sector, the media arm, everything else, to try and take this back over, or just take over social media and the media by force, the financial sector, whatever you've got to do. But some way, shape, or form, something's got to change, or even, some sort of terrorist grid or an EMP on the grid that takes down our entire electrical grid. At least might kill a lot of people, but it will unplug the rest of us from the control of these
Skynet
people. But so I see Trump at least attempting to go against, the Facebook, Twitter, Google censorship and try and break up those monopolies. So I don't know if it's going to be successful. If it's not successful, certainly, David, you're speaking of everything he's attempted, or every president attempts that they think is good, getting blocked by the real government is certainly true.
Yeah, I think the thing about Trump as well is that from a personal point of view, he knows that what's being censored overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly by this censorship are his supporters, the sources of information that the people that got him elected were influenced by.
And I'll just break in real quick to interrupt you. But wouldn't you say that most of the folks who support Donald Trump are folks who would agree with what you and I and Jeffrey are speaking about today? Yeah,
that's what I'm saying is that he also has a personal interest in stopping this censorship. I think he could do more. I think he could be much louder about it and much more focused about it. But he has an interest in that, because if he's going to get re-elected, he's going to be massively affected in a negative way by these sources of information that are basically saying what he says he stands for. They're being censored. So this next election, that information that circulated and got him elected, as we look at it now, he's not going to circulate in anything like the same way. So he's got an interest also in breaking up this censorship. But in the end, first, personally, I don't trust Trump. I never have. If you see my videos from 2016, I don't trust him. I don't trust Clinton. I don't trust any of them, because in the end, they are puppets of this force. And they might be pushing against it, but then again, you look at Trump and you say, well, how did he get to power? How did he get to power against all the odds? How did he beat something like 16 other Republican candidates that wanted the nomination when all the media apparently was against him? Well, one reason was that an enormous number of people are sick of the way the world's going. They're sick of the censorship. They're sick of political correctness. They're sick of all of it. And therefore, when he started talking about it, they went for him because he was telling them what they wanted to hear. So they went for him. But at the same time, if you look again, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. What I was saying in the run up to his election is that I think they want Trump in because they want to completely divide human society. They want to divide, rather, American society, human society too, but in this case, American society. They want to create a massive polarization. And if you look at the techniques of Marxism, which is to play groups off against each other. Mm-hmm. So, and now what they've done is created more and more groups. Instead of the haves against the have-nots groups played off against each other to transform society, now it's self-identity groups to play off against each other. More and more of them being created all the time. And it's because this, what I say, is a new version of Marxism based on self-identity groups. This is why you have this extraordinary alliance now between so-called progressives and multi-billionaires of the internet giants and banking giants and what have you. It's because instead of being united among the have-nots and united among the haves, now it's united by self-identity. So as long as the billionaire supports your self-identity group, then he's a good guy and he's your mate. And this is where this amazing alliance has come. So the other big technique that Marxism uses is to focus attention on an individual. If you want to bring down a government or divide society, then focus on it, personify it. Say this man personifies evil, basically. And you look at the way they play this. Look at what they did in Egypt when they removed Mubarak. Everything was focused on Mubarak. When they did the same in Ukraine, everything was focused on Yanukovych. He's evil, and therefore he must be removed. And so what they've done with Trump, and I'm not saying he's involved with this. He's again, a puppet in the end of this force, whether he fully knows it or not. They've made him Mr. Evil in the eyes of, basically the half of American society at the last election, and he's now the focus. So because of this technique, we're not talking about homeless people in Skid Row anymore. We're not talking about, I'm talking about the left or the alleged left. The left has been completely hijacked. We're not talking about social issues anymore. It's all about self-identity and Trump. That's everything. I turn on American television every day because I really like to keep up with what's happening there. And the debate, what you can call debate, is Trump and self-identity and political correctness. What about the gathering homeless in America? It's not talked about. And this is the way it's been played. So Trump has been very, very useful to these people. And the other part of Trump, which is not very much talked about, is the fact that he is basically owned by Israel, not least via his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a lifelong friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. And Israel's getting everything it wants now. It's getting the embassy moved. There's no pushback against illegal settlements in the occupied territories. There's no two-state solution left, no land left for a two-state solution, which was the plan all along. And so Trump, because he is very bombastic and he's very out there with his tweets and his statements, people can get the impression that here's a man striding the White House in total control of everything. He's not. He's absolutely not.
Well, unfortunately, because we live in that binary thought process, ladies and gentlemen, what David just described is absolutely true. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, you can be a critic of the Russian government and not be anti-Russian. You can be critical of the Mexican government and not be anti-Mexican. You can be critical of the Israeli government without being anti-Semitic or anti-Israeli. Just want to put that out there and qualify it because, this is the world we live in. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic now, apparently.
Yeah, and that's been done on purpose.
Yes.
Because and I find this absolutely stomach-turning disgusting. There are groups around the world that go into the Israeli government. They can be charted into the very department that's orchestrating it, headed by a former Israeli intelligence chief, who are absolutely using bad things that have happened to Jewish people to justify the censorship, to stop criticism of the far-right government in Israel. I find that sickening.
Yeah.
It's not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's about protecting the far-right government in Israel from legitimate criticism and exposure. And here's a confirmation of that. If you are Jewish and you criticize the government in Israel, then you are targeted by this network even more fiercely than non-Jewish people saying the same, because it's easy to dub a critic of Israel as anti-Semitic. And you're not really criticizing Israel, you're criticizing the government of Israel. It's easy to dub them anti-Semitic. But if you're Jewish and you're saying the same thing, very much more difficult. So you get the treatment even worse. Like I say, it's nothing to do with protecting Jewish people. Absolutely nothing.
Well, even the inversion of reality of just using that nomenclature, like anti-Semitic, like you describe in your videos, a Semitic just simply means a group of particular languages, of which Jewish language is one of them. Most of them are Arab. So it's just like it's pretty weird. So I got one more question for you. Before we let you go, people always say, these things are so crazy, they're so vast, there's no way that this could happen. And, a perfect word to kind of describe how it obviously can occur is through compartmentalization. The general doesn't have the same conversation with the general as he does with the private, or parents don't have the same conversation with each other as they do with their 8-year-old. Talk to me, if you will, before we let you slide, on just how compartmentalization works. It's a need-to-know kind of basis on a lot of these things. A lot of people have no idea they're a part of this agenda. It's just, larger than them.
This is absolutely crucial to it working, because once knowledge of it reaches a certain number of people, then it starts to unravel. So you've got to keep the nature of what you're doing secret from vast numbers of people who are actually making what you want happen without the knowledge of where the ultimate outcome is going. So I can do no better than to describe how a secret society works. You take the Freemasons. There's 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite of Freemasons in the world are on the bottom 3 levels of degree, the so-called blue degrees. And as you go up the degrees, you are told more, not only more and more. I've talked to many Freemasons who've come out of it. They say not only do they tell you more than they tell you in the lower degrees, they tell you different. They say things like, oh, no, well, forget all that. That was for that degree. This is the real story. And then they go a bit higher, and then they get another real story. It's all compartmentalization of knowledge. And the only people that know how the structure fits together and what the agenda that organization is pursuing actually is, are the few at the top. And so if you look at a corporation, a university, a government, any of these structures, media, organizations, they're structured the same. It's how many people working on the shop floor or working in a newsroom know what's being discussed in the offices of the upper levels of the hierarchy of that organization? They don't know any of it. They only know the information that reaches them, usually on the basis of this is what you're going to do. This is what how you're going to do this job. And so all over the world are billions of people who every day are making their little contribution to global enslavement while having no idea that that's what they're doing. They have children, they have families who are going to have to live in this world that we're heading towards. And if they knew what they were doing, then many of them, perhaps most of them, wouldn't be doing it. And so if you look at the way they make secret technology, they'll make part of it here, part of it there, part of it there, and part of it there. and only the few who actually put it together actually know what it is, and what it's, even they might not know what its role is. And this is happens throughout society, and therefore, when people say, "Oh, the media would tell us if it was true," well, it's the last people. The last people that would tell you what's happening in the world is the mainstream media. They're there to stop you knowing about it, not to tell you. But when they say, you need too many people to know, well, you wouldn't. This is because of this structure. And I tell you just a quick story. I've had people come to me. I've got one in mind immediately who was quite high up, actually very high up in Shell Oil. And he came to one of my events. And he came to me afterwards and he said, "I've just realized and understood so many things." He just retired. I've just realized so many things that happened in my career with Shell that I didn't understand before, but I can see now what they were really for. He didn't know, and he was right high up. I mean, he was like he was running a country level section of Shell, and he didn't know. You look at cabinets, like the British cabinet at the time of the Iraq War. They were kept overwhelmingly, most of them, in the dark about whether they were going to war or not. That was Blair and his little inner circle. But they didn't know the background to why the war with Iraq was manipulated into happening. And they would have made a different decision if they had have known. And we're talking about, government ministers here who didn't know. I mean, you take a government minister, right? They'll be given the environment department, say, in Britain. And they'll go in, they know nothing about the environment. So where do they get their information from? And their speeches from? And their positions from? They get it from what we call in Britain the civil service, government administration, deep state, or permanent government. And then they'll be they'll say what they have in Britain. The Prime Minister is having a cabinet reshuffle. In other words, they're going to move the deck chairs on the Titanic. And so the guy at the environment will now be put in charge of defence or something. And he won't know any more about defence than he knew about the environment. So when he gets into the defence department, the same thing happens. So it's basically a hierarchy of ignorance that allows this to happen.
What do they call them? Useful idiots, I guess.
Useful idiots, yeah.
Well, ultimately, I mean, I'd like to ask one more question on, how is this stopped or reversed? Besides, I mean, obviously spreading the information, but if the information does not spread, if the censorship is continued and the masses are continually dumbed down or the truth is hidden from them, what does the world look like?
Well, the worst case scenario, and I'm going only on what they are openly saying, if you put the dots together and you put the statements together and you put the subjects together, is a situation where the human brain is connected to AI. AI then becomes human consciousness. It becomes human perception. It becomes human emotional response, or what passes for it. There will be a very few people, basically at a central point, that will be dictating human perception in its entirety. And there will be, by then, a massive cull of the population, because of the way that, if you like, technology is going. They no longer need so many people to do what they want. So this is where this whole eugenics agenda and this, where they're moving towards is you get to a certain age and then that's it. Some of them are even talking about it. 75 is an age that comes up quite regularly in those discussions. So it will be a world that you can read about in 1984, and you can read about in Brave New World, and you can read about or watch in this stream of dystopian movies that's been coming out over the last 10, 15, 20 years, which is something known as preemptive programming, where they're basically preparing you consciously and subconsciously, to become familiar with the world they want to bring in for real. So they're actually putting it in front of our face, things like Minority Report, where they are dealing with crime even before it happens, because they're pre-crime, and it'd be pre-everything. I mean, look what they're doing now. They want pre-censorship of the internet, algorithms that stop things being posted. Never mind taken down once they are.
Well, we got that. What are the laws called, Pat? If you say something crazy on social networking and you own guns, somebody could call the cops and like no court hearing at all, just come take your guns based off of
the red flag laws.
Red flag laws, yeah, scary.
Yeah. This is all the stepping stones towards. It's like I say, know the outcome and you'll see the journey.
Right.
You see the journey in terms of what these things really mean. Once you know where we're being taken. If you don't know where we're being taken, they're just random events, which are looked at randomly. See the patterns, and it's very sinister. But again, it's based on control of human perception, and we can take that back. I mean, it's a whole new subject area, but you can take your perceptions back. You can increase your frequency and expand your state of awareness, even with all this bombardment that's coming our way. It's possible to do that because consciousness is more powerful than those who are seeking to manipulate it, but only if we understand the nature of the I. If we don't, and we self-identify with the labels, then we are disconnecting ourselves from that power of perceptual expansion, and therefore we become puppets in a game we don't even know is being played.
Boiling frogs.
We're surrounded by those puppets everywhere we go when we try to hold conversations with people who don't understand what we understand.
Yeah, that's the thing. But the thing is not to get frustrated about it, because nothing you can do about it except go on doing what you're doing.
Right.
But I must say, ending on a positive note, when I started out 30 years ago on this journey, I couldn't walk down a street in Britain without being laughed at, ridiculed, pointed out, and people laughing hysterically and shouting abuse. That doesn't happen now. That doesn't happen now. People stop me all the time, not just in Britain but around the world, to want to talk about this information seriously, and it can get frustrating and to an extent misleading if people look at the mainstream everything, as I call it, and perceive what's happening to people from that perspective. Because away from the microphones, you see, it's the shrill voices and the censors and the system people and system servers that basically have control of the microphones in the mainstream. Right. And it can seem, therefore, that there's certain perceptual state. But when you travel, as I do, and around the world, you see a different humanity. Of course, vast numbers of people are still in the program, but you see it changing. You see people questioning what they weren't questioning before. And, this Brexit thing in Britain was an expression of that. The reason they were shocked at 17.4 million people voting to come out of the EU, when the agenda is for the EU to absorb more countries, not let anyone go, is because they didn't understand that this awakening was happening, even on that level. And of course, when you're voting at an election, you can, again, not appreciate the scale of this perceptual change, because you vote for a party and the party tells you what it stands for, and then it goes and does what it bloody likes. But what happened with a referendum for the first time is it bypassed political parties in that way. It was, do you want to come out or do you want to stay in? And they were shocked at the people that wanted to come out because of the number that had realized what a straitjacket control system the EU is. And they never realized the political class that people were thinking like that. because they just take them for granted. Oh, they're the great unwashed. They'll believe anything we tell them. Well, that's not happening now like it was before. And of course, Trump is an example of that.
I was just going to say, I think Trump was a ripple effect of that as well, because I mean, part of that same
Trump
kind of consciousness shift.
Yeah, Trump was absolutely right. Whether people think he's genuine or not, he was saying what so many people in America thought, but up to that point, Republican or Democrat, had no means to express it, because you were looking at basically two masks on the same face very clearly.
Right.
The one-party state. He suddenly came and started talking in terms that many of those people were feeling but had no way of expressing. He gave them a means to express it, and that's why people again were shocked that Trump got in, because they don't understand how so many people are thinking differently to what we see in the public arena.
Wow. Without a doubt. Pat, any closing question, statement for David? We have kept him way longer than we told him we would, and I apologize, but man, this went awesome.
Well, I am optimistic in the fact that humanity will see the light and hopefully be able to reverse this path. I hope Trump is who many think he is. We will find out, I'm sure, in the future, but it is a bit scary to think of, if these folks, the elites, do reach their goals and their vision, man. It's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take Trump more seriously when I read a story that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo have been sacked, and someone like Tulsi Gabbard, I know she's a Democrat, has been made national security advisor, because I think that when that happens, we'll stop bombing brown-faced people in the Middle East, and we'll stop spending trillions of dollars on killing people and putting them in the coffers of the armament military-industrial complex, and we'll start putting people back in homes again and getting them off the street.
Well,
I do agree with you on Tulsi Gabbard, sir.
He's also surrounded by Goldman Sachs folks as well. David Icke, the new movie is Renegade. How do we track that movie down, sir, and how do we stay in touch with you and find out what you're up to?
Well, if people go to davidicke.com, ICKE, they'll find out how to watch the movie Renegade. They can watch it now if they like. It's about an hour and 40 minutes, and it connects an enormous number of dots. I didn't edit it. I didn't direct it. It was done by an American company that didn't absolutely support what I'm saying, because they didn't really know much about it. But they thought my story and what I'm saying would make an interesting movie, and they edited it. And because they edited it from we don't really know this in depth perspective, it's very accessible to anyone who are watching this stuff for the first time.
And very comprehensive, absolutely. Mr. David Icke, I cannot begin to thank you enough for all of the work you've done, sir, and for taking the time and coming on and chopping up with us today. Continued success and blessings, sir. I can't thank you enough, man.
Real pleasure. Absolute pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely. Safe travels. Be good, everyone. Peace and so much love. Stay tuned. There will always be more.